Oh, sorry, I should have asked beforehand. Does anyone mind it being okay?
That's fine.
Perfect. Yeah, so hi everybody. Welcome to one of our Black History Month events. I'm Pani, and we're joined today by Sir Mark Hendrick and Councillor Sanchia Alasia, who will be talking about how we can improve Black male representation in the Labour Party. And I'd like to also introduce you to my co-chair, Tobi Dada, who will just say a few words before handing over to Mark.
Thank you for that, Pani. So my name is Tobi Dada. I am an exec on the Young Fabians. I'm currently helping to build out the YF Academy. If you haven't heard of that, it's an initiative designed to help upskill members of the Fabians. So I guess in terms of my experience, I remember when I was about sort of 11, 10 years old, and I was watching Tony Blair resign and handing over to Gordon Brown. And I was just fascinated and very intrigued about what was going on. And I said to my mum, oh, you know, like maybe I want to be a politician. Like politics seems really interesting. And she looked at me and she said, you know, Black men don't get elected. And that sort of put me off like getting involved in politics. I did study politics at A-level and I was always quite interested. But it was only when I went to university and I just saw so many like activists that looked like me and people, I guess, that were of my ethnicity getting involved that I decided, you know, maybe I would give it a shot. However, my experience, you know, in sort of local Labour Party politics has been mixed. You know, contrary to popular belief, there are still a lot of microaggressions within the party and on the left of politics, and it's been something I've had to deal with. So yeah, that's just been about my experience in terms of representation and how we can improve that. One thing that I find fascinating is how the Conservative Party were very quickly able to increase representation to the point where they now have more black male MPs than the Labour Party. One thing that I think they did that, you know, helped them was the A-list. For those of you who don't know, David Cameron, when he came into power in 2005, when he was leader of the Conservative Party, he created an A-list of 100 candidates who automatically got fast-tracked to the assessment centre. Now, I think if we had a very similar thing within the Labour Party, we could definitely improve our diversity. But yeah, those are just my initial thoughts. And we are going to hand over to Pani, who will introduce Mark. We can't hear you. No worries. Mark, maybe you can just start.
Sorry.
Oh, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, so I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Sir Mark Hendrick, who is the MP for Preston and was previously an MEP in the European Parliament. So Mark, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, and thank you very much for the invitation. I must apologise in advance. I may be called out to vote a bit later on during this meeting, but obviously I'll be back as soon as I possibly can. And whilst one or two votes I've been exempt from, there are one or two that I need to attend, so I'll do my best. I'll start by saying I'm a mixed race black born in the late 1950s in the UK, prior to any race relations legislation, into a society beset, what I would say, with white privilege. Over the last 60 or so years, things have improved slowly in the way that many black people are treated, but the dehumanizing people of colour still takes place far too often today. You do not become immune to racist behaviour, however high up the social ladder you climb, however much you may earn, or however much respect you gain in your profession. And as we know, there are numerous shades of racism, and rather than that racism disappearing the higher up you go, it gets more subtle, covert and sophisticated. As I said earlier, growing up in the 1960s, before any equality and race relations legislation, was quite usual for racism to be seen as acceptable, and Black people in general were treated as second-class citizens, and in most cases expected to be treated so. And after the early racial equality legislation, by the time of the 1970s, casual racism was still extremely common in society generally, even though discrimination legislation was in place. There was no Black or ethnic minority voice in Parliament. Now, the 1980s saw a lot of agitation for more Black and Asian MPs to be elected to Parliament. This was partly achieved through the formation of Labour Party Black sections founded in 1983, which I at the time opposed because there was a view also at the time held by some that to create Black sections would, as I would put it, ghettoise Black people in the Labour Party, that is, to some extent isolate them. However, it was not until 10 years later at the 1987 general election that the first cohort of 4 Black and Asian MPs were elected to the House of Commons. Paul Boateng, Bernie Grant, Keith Vaz and Diane Abbott were those MPs. Now, there's been some progress since, but by no means as much as we like to see. I'd just like to share the screen if I can. Just let me try and get this to work. And bring up a diagram. So there on the left of my screen, you'll see a table starting with showing the Labour MPs elected between 1987 and 2000 from ethnic minority groups, and the broader categorization is either Black or Asian. And as you can see from the first 4 in the cohort that I mentioned, Dan Abbott, Paul Boateng, Bernie Grant, Keith Vaz, it was another 4 years until an Asian MP was elected to Labour, which was 1991 with Ashok Kumar. And then in 92 at the general election, the only addition to that group was Pierre Cabra, who was Asian from Ealing Southall. And then in 1997, we got the addition of Mohammed Sarwar, Marsha Singh, and Una King, who was the second female Black MP after Diane Abbott. And then in 2000, we saw David Lammy elected, and then months afterwards, myself in the year 2000. Now, one of the things that I'm sure those attending today's event will be aware of is that since 2000, there's only been one Black male MP elected to Parliament, and that was Clive Lewis in 2015. Now that is a pretty pitiable record, given that we've over 30 Black and Asian members of Parliament on the Labour side, and I think something like 19 on the Conservative side. In fact, the Conservatives now have more Black male MPs than we do on the Labour side. So it's a pretty embarrassing situation when the only person elected since me and David Lammy in 2000 is Clive Lewis as a Black male MP. Now, in order to redress this situation, it's my view that obviously we need, so just trying to stop my notes out here. We need, I think, more Black role models. And sorry, just hold on a second. Yeah, we need more Black role models, and I specifically say Black, not Asian, because all too often the BAME tag is applied as a sort of one-size-fits-all plaster to numerous issues. So, for example, Asian people from Indian heritage background are quite highly representative, for example, in the medical and dentistry sector in the NHS, and also as I would suspect in private enterprise industries too. At the same time, the male Black population is only overrepresented, I would argue, in the prison population. So I think we need to be clear about what the issues are specifically for Black men, especially young Black men, that prevents them or deters them from entering politics. becoming politically active and putting themselves forward for selection as an MP. Now, the other thing I think to look at is to contrast Black MPs representing predominantly white constituencies with Black MPs that represent predominantly Black constituencies. As I said, the only Black MP elected since my by-election in November 2000 is Clive Lewis, who was elected at the 2015 general election. Extremely poor, and as I said, the Conservatives have considerably out-elected Labour in the selection and election of Black MPs. And at the last general election in 2019, 13 new Black and minority MPs were elected, including 5 Black women, but no Black men. And I think what the situation has been in the Labour Party is clearly there's a push for more women. There's clearly a push for more ethnic minority women. And so I think ethnic minority or Asian female MPs have done quite well. Asian Black women MPs have done quite well. But as I say, the shortage is on the Black side for men in the Labour Party. Now, some time back, Stephen Bush, who's political editor of the New Statesman, produced an article for the New Statement, making the statement that why the first Black British Prime Minister is likely to be a Conservative. Now, part of the success that the Conservative Party has had in getting Black and Asian candidates into safe seats has been particularly due to the A-list and the way in which the party leadership within the Conservative Party have sort of groomed some MPs in order to strongly push them in particular constituencies. Now, we've tended not to do that in the Labour Party. We've left the sovereignty of the selection and shortlisting and selection of MPs mainly to the constituency parties themselves, except of course where constituencies have been delegated as all women constituencies. Now obviously that's done well for female representation in Parliament. It's actually done reasonably well for female ethnic minority representation in Parliament, but it's done absolutely nothing in terms of increasing the number of Black male MPs in Parliament. And I think this is relevant for 2 reasons. I would certainly say that even though the vast majority of Labour Party members are not racist, from my personal experience, there does exist both a conscious and unconscious bias towards white candidates, where the vast majority of Labour Party members in a constituency are white. I recall when I was selected as a European parliamentary candidate that my agent received correspondence, some anonymous and some not, complaining about the fact that the party had selected a Black candidate rather than, quote, one of our own. Now, that letter and similar letters to it were from Labour Party members to my agent who was running my campaign to become a European member of the European Parliament, I should say. And in addition, I think it's naturally assumed that a white candidate was to be selected, and the inclusion of a Black candidate on the shortlist, even though I'd received nominations, was in a way just tokenism, and I wasn't really considered a serious candidate. And for that matter, it wasn't considered serious that I actually might get selected and eventually elected, but I was. Now, as I say, the Conservatives, by contrast, tend to be much more forceful in the way candidates are selected, because there's much more of an effort to try and impose Black and ethnic minority candidates in the constituency Conservative associations, rather than leave the choice to local members, as I said earlier, in the way that the Labour Party does. The second reason why I believe this is relevant is that once selected and elected to the House of Commons, the MP has a duty to represent all of their constituents and not just minority communities. In addition, to take on board the views of all Labour Party members in the CLP, not just those of minority ethnic backgrounds. And it may occur to some that this should go without saying, but there will always be party members and members of the public who believe that a minority ethnic MP can be pigeonholed by a perception that they are there to further the interests of a minority section of the community rather than the community as a whole. Now, from my personal experience, the only way to counter that perception is to try to be even-handed in treating all the issues an MP is presented with in as much an even-handed approach as possible. And finally, in addition to the points I've raised, there are issues around attracting more Black men to join the Labour Party, more Black men to become active, engaged, providing political role models that are attractive to Black men, and pursuing proactive programmes to try and target and recruit Black men in that particular direction. In the past, American role models probably have been much stronger because of the struggle for equal rights that has gone on in the US since the 1960s. Even though we had changes of legislation ourselves in the 1960s, that struggle has not been quite the same. And as well, that those role models have not been replicated to the same degree in the UK as has been the case in the US for historical reasons. The question is, and I think what some of the discussion may focus on now, is how we go forward in attracting more Black men into the Labour Party, and how do we get more Black men to put themselves forward to stand for parliamentary selection. So I'll leave it at that now. I'll be happy to answer any questions or listen to comments, and I'll just stop sharing this diagram, which obviously shows all of the people selected and elected up until my election in 2000. Now, there's been dozens since then, but as I said earlier, the shame is that on the Labour side, we've only got one addition to that list, and that was in 2015 in terms of Black male MPs. So I'll leave it there and just bring it back to the meeting as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mark. So Pani, do you want to come in?
No, I was just going to thank Mark. I think you were introducing Sanchia next. So thanks.
I just wondered, because Mark may have to run for a vote, there is one question in the Q&A, so I don't mind if you take that question and then I can follow on, just in case he's not able to answer it later.
Yeah, just to read out the question, what will represent success in terms of number of Black and Asian candidates and elected representatives in the Labour Party and overall, and House of Commons overall, and when is it likely to be achieved? Okay, those are two questions. And then the third question is also, what can help speed up the process? So we can't hear you, you're on mute.
I don't think there's an absolute measure of success. I think there are degrees of success, and clearly I'd say the more the merrier. The more Black male MPs that we can get, the more Black male candidates we can get, preferably in safer seats. It used to be the case that very often minority candidates were given either unsafe seats or unwinnable seats. But I think really a conservative effort has to be made. Now, there is a question in that if Black male candidates, or any ethnic minority candidate for that matter, is totally reliant upon being selected in a constituency which is predominantly ethnic minority, then that significantly cuts down the number of constituencies that they're likely to be able to go for and have a chance of being selected in. And whilst, for the reasons I said about conscious and unconscious bias, it is more difficult to get selected in a seat that is predominantly white, it is still doable. I mean, my seat has a significant minority ethnic composition in terms of the electorate and the membership, but it's overwhelmingly white in terms of the makeup of the constituency, and for that matter, the constituency party. But I've obviously managed to do it, and there are one or two other MPs have done it as well. Clive Lewis's seat in Norwich is not a majority ethnic minority seat, and nor is the membership. There are seats in London that are weighted that way and suit ethnic minority candidates. It's easier for them because there are much higher ethnic minority populations in London, and similarly in a place like Birmingham and probably Manchester and Liverpool too, in the big cities. But generally speaking, out of 650 seats nationally, I would think, you know, you're talking about maybe a couple of dozen seats at the very most that minority ethnic candidates could go for. And if you're looking specifically at Black male MPs, then it narrows it down even further. If you're looking for an Afro-Caribbean predominantly membership and electorate based seat. So I think my view is that you better throw your net much wider and trying to widen your appeal. And that, from my point of view, that means not speaking about race, not speaking about religion or discrimination. Of course, that's part of your arsenal, that's part of your weaponry in terms of making your arguments. But also, I think you've got to be more broad-based in your outlook in terms of what you feel about economic issues, what you feel about foreign policy issues, how you feel on the environment. And it really needs Black candidates and any ethnic minority candidate for that matter, not just to specifically try and specialise in or just focus on race, but broaden the range of issues that you bring to bear to a constituency. I mean, every MP and every candidate will have their own, I wouldn't say pet issues, but certainly favourite issues. It could be, you want to, stop climate change, you want to do something about housing. There'll be a whole range of issues which you're interested in, and you can bring forward knowledge and expertise, maybe from your professional life before you became a candidate, or interests that you've just followed as somebody active in politics. But I do think you've got to have a much broader appeal to get into a seat where race is less of an issue than bread and butter things like the economy, jobs, the health service, education, etc. So I wouldn't say the success is measured by just how many we get. I think success is measured by how broadly Black people who want to be candidates can spread themselves across the country in constituencies which are not necessarily minority ethnic dominated in terms of membership or the electorate. And I think that would measure success, because apart from myself and Clive, we do have minority ethnic candidates like Sarah Owen in Luton, Lisa Nandy in Wigan, which is a very white parliamentary seat, who have got selected, not through their ethnicity or because of their ethnicity, or even when the ethnicity went against them, but because they're just seen as the sort of candidate who will stick up for the people who live there and represent the people who live there, irrespective of the race, creed, or background. So I think that's the key, and that's what I would regard as success.
Question as well. Do you think, because one of the things you mentioned as well is when the 4 first Black MPs were elected, one of the reasons why they were elected is because there was a concerted effort from the party and also the wider membership to elect Black MPs. So do you think it's time that we had BAME shortlists? I know that the current laws in this country don't allow for us to discriminate in that way. But if, should that be part of the Labour Party's next manifesto, that we will legislate to allow for some form of positive discrimination that allows more Black or Asian or other minority groups to get into Parliament?
I'm tempted to say yes on this question, but I've not always held that view, and I'll say yes because of the difficulty we've had in getting more Black male MPs. And it sounds perverse at a time when women have been striving for equality and equal representation to say that you should have a Black male shortlist. I'm still uncomfortable with the idea, and I'd be interested to see what female Black or Asian MPs or candidates or potential candidates feel on the issue. But if the way in which we redress that imbalance is through engineering the system to give a particular outcome, it's been done before for women. It's been done to enhance the number of minority ethnic women in a way, but it's never been done to enhance the number of male MPs, Black or otherwise. So it is new ground. but I don't detect at the moment any strong movement in that direction. I can see the problem, I can see the failure that's happened over the last 15, 20 years, the way in which we've not got the number of black male candidates we should have. I think that question seriously needs to be asked. Because if the Conservatives can do it their way, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do it our way.
I completely agree. So I guess this would be a really good time to bring in Sanchia. So hi. So you are a councillor, or Sanchia is a councillor for Barking and Dagenham.
By the way, if I have to disappear to vote, because I will vote on the next vote, please accept my apologies, but I'll come back as soon as I can. Thanks.
And she is also a specialist in defeating the far right. And I've lived in Dagenham for a bit, so I know exactly what she means by that. But yeah, like we're so glad and honored to have you here, and we would really like your input on this issue. So maybe you could just start by giving us your initial thoughts on this debate.
Yeah, I think Sir Mark Hendrick MP has done a really good introduction there. So I'll kind of just try and build on what he's already outlined. So we know that in the last general election, which was 2019, we did see more black, disabled and female MPs in the Labour Party elected. And you know, for Parliament to be effective and face the many challenges that lie ahead in the months and years ahead, and we kind of living through, I guess, some of the most challenging times that we have, it's got to have that diverse representation and people from all walks of life. The Parliament is stronger and operates more effectively when it reflects the society that it seeks to represent. But, you know, research from the Runnymede Trust has shown that even though there's more BME MPs being elected, changing demographics in the wider society mean that the gap of BME MPs reflecting society is proportionately maybe not that much different from when it was when our Fab Four, as Mark has outlined in 1987, were elected. There's still a gap, because if you think that there's been an increase in the BME population since then although numerically it's higher, but proportionately it might not necessarily be. And as we've heard Sir Mark Hendrick MP outline, the last black male MP for the Labour Party was elected 6 years ago. And it's not that we haven't had black male parliamentary candidates since then. I certainly know there were black male parliamentary candidates in the 2019 election, but they were in unwinnable seats. And we did see a lot of black female talent, and rightly so, elected to the Labour benches in 2019, and they're doing a fantastic job representing the party and their constituents. But we do need to do more. A lot has been done, but a lot more needs to be done. We've kind of touched on a few of the issues. We've seen the dramatic effect of all women shortlists. However, you know, very few black candidates come through that. And, you know, as, you know, a black woman, I feel that given the overrepresentation of black men in the mental health systems, in the prison systems, the Labour Party does need to do more to support and encourage black men to stand, because black men need role models too. So we've got to work together as a party to explore those options of how we increase black male representation. It's important because as Black and Asian people in this society, we contribute, and we have contributed, and I'm really pleased that these days our history is and our contributions are coming through in a more representative way. But not only in politics are we underrepresented, we're underrepresented in all areas of public life. And this lack of representation within politics, you know, and subsequent lack of voice can, you know, contribute to that disengagement from politics. People don't see people that look like them, and they then don't feel that maybe being elected as a councillor or being elected as an MP is something that is for them. The Labour Party has always been the party to have led on equality and diversity, both in terms of policy and historically representation. And so we're doing quite well with BME female MPs, but we do have a long way to go, you know, in other spheres. And we've seen that the increase in female MPs over the years has really helped ensure that women's voices and views are reflected in decision making, leading to better outcomes. And that's why it's really important that we have people elected into public life and participating in public life, so that our voices are heard and our views and our concerns are taken into account when those policy decisions are being made. We've seen that the progress has stagnated with the election of Black male MPs. And I think there's some real challenges that Black male candidates face at both in wanting to become a councillor and also to Parliament. The selection process to become an MP can be quite lengthy, it can be expensive. I know I ran for selection in 2019 in Enfield North, so I came second to the wonderful Veriel Clark. But you know, I had to spend a couple of grand to get the text messages out and to get the leaflets out. It's expensive. And as Mark said, if we want to pursue seats outside of London, which we absolutely should be considering, because we shouldn't constrain ourselves just to the large metropolitan cities, it then means that aspiring candidates can face the considerable hotel bills, the travel bills, and weeks away from home as they try to build a relationship with local party members. So I think there are financial barriers that the party need to look at. I think the way that the selections are run need to look at. I do support the BME shortlist, you know, that some people have been calling out for as a positive action measure, so that we do have those candidates that do come from a wide range of backgrounds that will be at the centre of our political decision making. You know, we're part of the Labour Party because of its diversity. We know that there's a lot of diversity within the party. What we need to ensure now is that the party keeps leading that way in terms of representation and takes those practical steps to make it a reality. The issue of diversity must be a priority. It's got to start from the top. And if we are to deliver representation to everyone in this country, then Black male representation matters. So thank you. And welcome any questions. I haven't seen any in the Q&A box, but if anybody wants to.
Yeah, I have a few questions. I mean, when I posed the idea of a shortlist, I wasn't necessarily talking about it in the context of making it a male like BAME shortlist. I think that would probably be too controversial. But I do think if you had BAME only shortlists, I think you would see that increase that would be needed. I guess another question as well is, one thing that I guess we need to touch on as well is a Black man has never been elected to the NEC.
Yeah, and, I saw that campaign.
And like it was a great campaign. And yeah, that's another sort of issue. Like, you know, if Black members of the party aren't getting into senior positions, then, you know, talk less of running for an MP. We need to also address that as well. So what ways do you think we could do to address that issue?
Yeah, I think as I sort of alluded to, it's got to be a priority. It's got to be a priority for the party. And we know that a lot of public and private sector organisations have been reviewing their work on race equality, particularly since the Black Lives Matter movement sort of last year, and seeing how COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on our communities. But sometimes what can happen is we can make statements at the time of these things happening, but then the action to take the work forward is not sustained. So what we have to do is we have to continue to do the work, because the work for change is not an overnight thing. It's going to take time to get the processes right. I think, you know, consultation with Black men, you know, I've outlined some of the things in terms of the finances and other things which I think are a barrier, but I think hearing from the lived experiences of Black men who have or are aspiring to be candidates and those who have been candidates would also be useful. So we hear directly from them in terms of what they think would be helpful. And I think through our policy processes nationally and also locally, it has to be a priority. I know I saw a number of tweets the other day that there were a number of people accepted onto the Future Candidates programme. When we have programs like that, it's important that we have a diverse range of people accepted onto them, which I'm not sure what the breakdown is, but hopefully you've got that. And hopefully, you know, programs like that, and I think the Bernie Grant program is still in operation as well. We then sort of think about the succession planning and nurturing the next generation. But ultimately, it's got to be, there's a bottom-up approach, which is kind of, you know, what we're kind of sort of doing, but there's got to be also a top-down approach as well, where we kind of meet in the middle and work together to make the change happen.
If I could just come in there, just to address one or two points that Tobi made. On the question of black shortlists or minority ethnic shortlists, I think you were saying you weren't necessarily suggesting that they're all male necessarily. And I would go along with that, certainly. So, you know, if it was male and female minority ethnic shortlists, I think they'd be far more acceptable. But the other issue that I think is very important is that, are those type of shortlists acceptable in constituencies where there aren't either a majority minority ethnic makeup of the electorate or the membership? Because to do it in an area where, you know, let's say it was mainly white, or, you know, vast majority of the electorate was white and the membership was white, it would look pretty strange. So, you know, again, I think cognizance needs to be taken of the electorate in terms of how you make up a shortlist, not just the party's wishes to get more people of whatever, you know, skin colour or racial background into the House of Commons itself.
I think the Tories have shown that it is possible, though. I mean,
oh, sorry. The other point that I was going to make, Tobi, sorry to interrupt you, because I'm going to have to vote in a minute, is that very often the Tories who do get elected and selected usually bring their own money with them. They're very often millionaires, very rich individuals who are not just paying for the privilege of being the MP, but are actually physically, cash-wise, paying for their election expenses and everything else that goes with it. So it's not just a question of typical Labour candidates schlepping around a particular region or particular cities to see if, you know, the face fits, so to speak, and they could get support for them. You know, having to look at maybe staying in a bedsit or renting a room, the thousands that Sanchia spoke about, that you need to have to even to get selected as a Labour candidate is still a big expense. And I've known people here in the House of Commons, you know, spend a very long time after they've been elected, that's if they're lucky enough to be elected, paying back debts that they've actually incurred, just trying to become candidates in the first place. Now the Tories don't have that problem. And I agree with you, it's all right, if the Tories can do it, why can't we? But don't forget, many of these people pushing themselves in the Tory party have got the wherewithal to go with it. Many of our people don't. And in fact, probably proportionately, our black and ethnic minority candidates have less cash than their counterparts in the party. So I think that's another consideration. I'm going to have to love you and leave you here, but I do thank you for invitation. We've got to get this last vote in, and
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for.
If you've got any feedback or any more questions, you've got my email address, and just let me know. I'll be happy to get back to any of you. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
I think, Toby, with the financial thing, one sort of thing is maybe having a cap on spending. So as candidates, you know, if we had to declare our spending and there was a cap, even if there were some candidates that were more privileged and had more, which there always will be, if there was an actual cap that was fair and reasonable, maybe £2,000 or something, which I guess it sounds a lot, but when you have to post literature and print it and send text messages, it's not, you know, it doesn't, you know, that probably just about covers it just. But if there's, yeah, maybe a cap of 2,000, it then means that those that have more money, you know, for example, those that have more funds might send out multiple leaflets, for example, but that would restrict everybody to just sending out one. So then everybody would kind of be on a more level playing field. So that's one way to address, and obviously bursaries and grants, and we need to, you know, think about that as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think bursaries and grants can definitely go a long way. One thing I was going to say, I think if we want to fix this issue, right, because I think the issue is structural at the end of the day, then we need to sort of like, I guess, shake the Dow a bit, because the Tory party, what they've very strategically done is they've got minority candidates standing in all white constituents.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, after a while, some of these white constituents will be like, oh, you know, minorities are actually make good MPs. So I think the issue we have, and I guess electorally, whether you want to look at it, you know, from a point of will constituents feel comfortable having a black MP if they're in a majority white seat. I think if you impose it in safe seats and people realize, yeah, well, you know, black people are just as competent, if not even more competent than their white counterparts, I think it will create long and sustained change. I completely understand it from the perspective of if you've only lived in a small village and you haven't really interacted with black people, and the only image of black people you have is from the sun and what you see on TV, then I completely understand why you might be apprehensive in voting for a black man to be your MP. However, I think if the party imposed, you know, said to a certain area that you can only pick from a handful of BAME candidates, I think long term that would, you know, move us ahead significantly, because then people will realize that, you know, these people are doing a very, very good job. But I think I wouldn't shirk away from sort of the party imposing candidates, especially like black candidates in particular areas.
Yeah, I think as Mark said, once you're elected to serve the whole population. So no matter their colour or any other aspects, you're there to represent them. You represent people that didn't vote for you. You represent people that voted for another party. So it is an interesting argument, because I suppose the gender argument is a bit simpler in the sense of we know the gender makeup might vary slightly, but generally it's, you know, 52% women, 48% men. But obviously BME populations will vary across different cities. So that's sometimes where the questions come up about the suitability of BME shortlists in those areas. But I think, I don't think that should be ruled out because of that reason. I think we should keep an open mind. Ultimately, as you say, Toby, it's about the capability to do the job. And if it's about the capability to do the job, it shouldn't, in theory, then matter whether that candidate is BAME or not.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think another aspect of this as well is, I think Mark touched on this a little bit. So the whole idea of descriptive representation and having a parliament that reflects the society it runs, I think there's a huge gap. There aren't enough black working class people in parliament. I mean, yeah, we can talk about how the Tories have more black male MPs than the Labour Party, but what backgrounds do they come from? You know, are they all Etonians? Do they all have, you know, a tree of money somewhere? So when you add that context, there is still a huge gap that the Labour Party can and should fill, where working class minority groups aren't being represented. And, you know, the Labour Party was created to represent working class people. So I think there is still a gap for the Labour Party to lead on this issue. I think it just has to have the courage to live up to its convictions. And yeah, like, I wouldn't rule anything out. I think at this point, the leadership was to say, we are imposing candidates. I think, people grumble, but I think eventually the party will have to accept it and realize that it's actually a good thing. I remember all women shortlists were opposed. People said it would ruin the party and it wasn't necessary. And look at what it's done. I mean, since all women shortlists have been introduced, so many more women have gone into parliament, and so many capable women as well. Not like we're just electing people who aren't good at the job. Some of our best parliamentarians are women that were elected in all women shortlists. So I think, yeah, there's a very strong argument to trying to really shake up this conversation.
Excellent.
I just want to add, I think that's something which was also highlighted. Standing BAME candidates in majority white areas is something which was also highlighted in the recent pamphlet by the Fabians, Building Bridges, by Sally Gimson, where she was talking about her experiences as being candidate in Bassetlaw. And yeah, I think it's something which the Tories have done kind of really well. Like, you've got what's her name in Saffron Walden.
Saffron Walden, is it?
Yeah,
it might be Kemi Badenoch. Is it Kemi Badenoch?
Kemi Badenoch, yeah, that's it. Yeah, and that's like 98% white.
Yeah.
And
Bim Mafalami, I think that's his name. He's also in a very white constituency.
Yeah.
And then James Cleverly and Braintree, where you can just kind of roll them off. And what they've managed to do is they've managed to kind of get that representation and get those kind of voices heard in a way which we haven't. And I think it's something that we've really got to do a lot of work on still.
Absolutely.
I think at a local level, we've done, I guess, better. I would say, particularly in London, where you actually got some Black leaders of the council, some Black mayors in London as well. So I guess on a local level, we are doing quite well. It's just the PLP isn't really representative of the population. And like, I wouldn't, again, I wouldn't shirk away from putting some Black candidates in the heartlands, the seats we need to win back. I know that will seem like a very bold step, and the leadership may not want to do that for certain reasons, but I wouldn't shy away from it. I think, if anything, it shakes things up and it shows that you're confident in your principles. Does anyone have any other questions they would like to ask before we wrap things up?
Hopefully everything was clear.
Anyone have any suggestions or thoughts about some of the stuff we've said?
No,
I don't think there's anything.
I think that's everything. So, Sanchia, once again, I want to thank you for coming, and thank you, of course, to Mark as well. And yeah, it's been a really good discussion, and some really important points were raised.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming, and yeah, hopefully we can have more conversations like this throughout the year, not just in October. Yeah, I think this should definitely be an ongoing conversation within the party. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Right, thank you.
Excellent.